Hello, I'm John from the Christian Century, and I'm joined today again by Elizabeth Felicetti. She's written a new article for the magazine about a person she knows who is incarcerated and who is pursuing ordination in the Episcopal Church. So we are going to talk about that article today, but first, Elizabeth, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are?
Thanks. I'm so happy to be chatting with you again. I am the rector of St. David's Episcopal Church in suburban Richmond, Virginia, and I'm a bivocational priest in that, in addition to working at a church 30 hours a week, I also spend significant time writing.
That's great. Well, I'm glad that you write for us, among other places. So, in this article, you talk about a man, Luke Matthews, who is in prison and who wants to be an Episcopal priest. And you mentioned that he came onto your radar because of a devotional he had written. And I was curious if you could just tell us a little bit more about the beginning of this story. How did you come to become involved in his ordination process?
Well, I was aware of that devotional. I had not actually read it, but I had heard about it from various parishioners. And my deacon, Bill Jones, found out about Luke and his desire to become ordained from our bishop at the time, who asked Bill to visit him and discern whether or not Bill thought Luke had a call to ordination. So Bill talked to me about it and then told me about, he said, oh, he wrote this devotional. And I thought, wow, I heard of that. I then read the devotional, loved it. And I felt called to answer this because I had read a book not too long before by one of my former writing professors, Richard Shelton, called Crossing the Yard, about his work with men in prison. And I thought that is one area where Christ asked us to do that I am not doing. So it seemed like a definite call to me. So when Bill approached me, I said, yes, let's explore this. And that's what kicked it off.
That's great. So the piece is largely about Luke, but it's also largely about the process of his ordination, and in some senses, the ways that it went wrong. I know I've had a lot of issues with ordination processes. The way that they're structured often to me bakes in a certain amount of classism, sexism, racism. And while Luke's situation may be unique as an incarcerated person, at the same time, I think it's showing some of the same flaws that appear in many people's ordination processes. I'm curious if you have some thoughts on ordination and maybe some ways that, in general, the processes should be changed or reformed.
Thank you. I actually was ordained from this same diocese, and I do find our process very cumbersome, and it's been revamped several times since I've been here, but it remains very difficult. And it was very difficult. For example, it requires 5 meetings with a small group, and just getting a small group of people credentialed to go into the prison to meet with Luke 5 times took, I think, almost a year. It was a very long process and very difficult for someone who is incarcerated. So I do wish that the diocese could be proactive in coming up with some alternatives for people who are non-traditional candidates. At the time, what they had said after we had undergone this process and submitted the paperwork, which we had been told we needed to do everything the way it would be for anyone else, was, oh, now we want to form a committee to study it, and that could take up to 2 years, which was very frustrating at the time. I still think that it could be better. I think we have a new bishop now. I think that she is committed to listening to how the process could improve. But this experience really was extremely disheartening for me, and of course for Luke, much more so.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned a couple of the maybe logistical challenges with an incarcerated ordination candidate. I'm curious what other challenges may be specific to this situation Luke was in. Were there theological or psychological challenges also that came up given the sort of unique circumstances of his situation?
Definitely. That's a fantastic question. I think that this opportunity can really speak to the church about our Christian ethos of forgiveness. Do we do we really mean it? Because this man committed terrible crimes, and can we really forgive him for that and then accept ministry from him or from someone who has committed terrible crimes? In the Bible, certainly people, David, Moses, there are giants of the Paul, giants of the faith who committed terrible acts, who then went on to pursue redemption and to lift other people up. I was extremely nervous about talking to my congregation about Luke. Uh, and actually, the most nervous I have ever been before a sermon was the sermon in 2013, when I was approaching my congregation to tell them, um, I am going to be pursuing this with this person, and this is an opportunity for all of us. And one parishioner in particular often had some pretty critical feedback for me after sermons. And I noticed him after this sermon, before which I was, shaking and trying not to be sick. I noticed him hanging back, and I thought, oh no, here it comes, here it comes. But when he came, he shook my hand and said, thank you. You've given me so much to think and pray about. And I was shocked because I had never had a reaction like that from him. So even though this did not result in the answer that we were seeking, I do believe it has been a gift to my congregation to explore forgiveness and discernment with Luke. And I hope that it has been a gift for Luke as well, but I know for him it's been incredibly frustrating.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I'm glad to hear about what a gift it was to your congregation for you to walk through this process. Well, we'll wrap it up there for this article. But for those of you who didn't get a chance to read the piece, the link to this article on our website will be below in the video description. And finally, Elizabeth, you have a book coming out. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your book?
Thank you. I have a book coming out in August from Erdman's called Unexpected Abundance, The Fruitful Life of Women Without Children, which looks at how women without children can live abundant lives, which is something that religion does not always affirm for us. And I think that there are plenty of examples in the Bible as well as in our faith of women who have been extraordinarily fruitful, even if they did not become mothers.
Mm, that's great. Well, we will look forward to that. Thank you so much for chatting today, Elizabeth.
Oh, thank you so much, John. It's a pleasure.